By dawn, either my wife will confess, or 30 royal ships will lie broken beneath these cliffs. The Duke of Blackmere's declaration silenced the harbour courtyard. Eleanor stood beside him with her wrists bound, the salt wind pulling loose strands of dark hair across her face. Sailors, customs officers, and fishermen crowded behind the iron gates, staring at the woman who had guided vessels through Blackmere Bay for 6 years as though she had suddenly become its greatest enemy. Above them, the lighthouse flame revolved crimson against the night. Far beyond the harbour wall, 30 royal warships moved in 3 perfect lines. Their lanterns resembled a procession of stars, but Eleanor knew what waited beneath their course. The rising tide concealed the widow's teeth, a field of jagged reefs capable of tearing open the strongest hull in the Royal Navy. The fleet would reach them before dawn. Only 3 hours remained. Her husband, Nathaniel Harcourt, Duke of Blackmere, stepped closer. His naval blue coat bore the silver insignia of the Admiralty appointment he had received that morning. "Tell them you changed the signal," he said quietly. "Confess, and I may persuade the Crown to spare your life." Eleanor looked at the brass key hanging from Lord Edmund Vale's waist. It was the only key to the lighthouse signal room. 12 hours earlier, Nathaniel had stripped her of command and placed that key in his cousin's hand. He had done so despite her warning that the accusations against her were built upon copied entries and a forged signature. Now Edmund stood behind the Duke, composed and pale beneath the harbour lamps. "You know I could not have lit that flame," Eleanor said. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Your instructions were discovered in the signal ledger." "A ledger," Edmund delivered. "A ledger bearing your handwriting. An imitation of it. You have an explanation for everything except the evidence." The words hurt because she remembered another Nathaniel, the young Marquess who had once climbed the lighthouse stairs beside her, laughing when the wind stole his hat. He had trusted her then. Tonight, with royal office finally within his grasp, he had examined the accusation for less than a minute before choosing the men who had promoted him. Eleanor lifted her bound hands. Between 2 fingers gleamed a narrow splinter of blue glass. "This was inside my locked desk." A murmur passed through the watching officers. Nathaniel glanced at it, but Edmund answered first. "A piece from one of her signal lenses, no doubt." "No Blackmere lighthouse has ever used blue glass," Eleanor said. "Blue is reserved for a wartime command, hostile control of a royal harbour." Edmund's expression remained calm, yet his thumb moved across the burn on his palm. Eleanor saw it. So did the old lighthouse keeper, kneeling under guard near the gate. Mr. Fenwick raised his head despite the blood drying at his temple. "Your Grace," he rasped, "Lady Blackmere speaks the truth. That glass did not come from our lantern." One of the guards struck his shoulder with a baton. "Do not touch him!" Eleanor stepped forward, but the chain between her wrists snapped taut. Nathaniel caught her arm. "You are in no position to command my officers. They were mine yesterday. And yesterday you had not attempted to wreck the king's fleet." For a moment, Eleanor could not speak. The humiliation was not merely public. Nathaniel had chosen its audience carefully. Every sailor whose family she had protected, every widow whose pension she had secured, every harbour worker who had obeyed her signals through winter storms. He wanted her authority destroyed before the Admiralty arrived to investigate. Then a cannon sounded from the sea. One blast, a signal requesting confirmation of the course. Every face turned toward the lighthouse. The crimson flame vanished. Darkness swallowed the glass chamber for 3 heartbeats. Then a blue light ignited above Blackmere Point. 2 short flashes. One long. Eleanor's blood went cold. The fleet answered with 3 cannon blasts. "They have accepted the command," she whispered. Nathaniel released her arm. "What command?" She looked at him. "Blackmere Harbour is under hostile control. The fleet has been ordered to enter the Eastern Passage and prepare its guns." Confusion broke through the courtyard. Sailors shouted toward the docks. Officers reached for telescopes. Church bells began ringing from the town as the first warship changed direction. Edmund seized the key at his waist. "We must reach the tower." Eleanor blocked his path. "If you enter that signal room, whatever remains inside will disappear." Nathaniel pulled her aside. "Enough. You still have a choice," she said. "Seal the tower. Search Edmund. Send riders to the western beacon and order it lit before the fleet crosses the reef line. and allow my accused wife to command a royal emergency. Allow the only person here who understands those signals to save 3,000 men. For one dangerous second, doubt entered his eyes. Edmund leaned close to him. The Admiralty appointed you because you promised to restore order. If you obey her now, the entire harbour will believe she still rules Blackmere. Nathaniel looked from his cousin to his wife. Then ambition overcame doubt. Take the Duchess to the lower cells. The guards closed around Eleanor. As they pulled her toward the customs house, she saw Edmund turn. His coat shifted, exposing a coil of copper wire and blue wax inside his pocket. Not lighthouse equipment, detonator wire. The false signal was not intended merely to wreck the fleet. Someone had prepared explosives along the eastern passage, and Nathaniel had just handed that person complete authority over the harbour. Eleanor stopped resisting. Her husband believed the humiliation was the purpose of the night. At last, she understood that it was only the disguise. Eleanor allowed the guards to lead her through the customs house without another protest. The lower cells lay beneath the harbour offices, where confiscated cargo had once been stored. The air smelled of damp stone, tar, and old rope. One guard unlocked an iron door while the other removed the chain from her wrists. You have 2 hours before the fleet reaches the eastern passage, Eleanor said. When the first hull strikes, the ships behind it will have no room to turn. The younger guard avoided her eyes. His name was Thomas Reed. Eleanor remembered approving compensation for his mother after his father drowned aboard a merchant vessel. He had once thanked her in this very building. Tonight, he would not even look at her. We have our orders, Your Grace. Your orders came from the man who placed an unauthorized wartime lens inside my desk. The older guard shoved her into the cell. The Duke said you would try to frighten us. The door slammed. The key turned. Eleanor stood motionless until their footsteps faded up the stairs. Only then did she let herself lean against the wall. For 6 years, she had held Blackmere Harbour together through storms, shortages, and Nathaniel's long absences in London. She had repaired the signal system with money from her marriage settlement, created tide tables for merchant captains, and negotiated with the Admiralty to keep the Eastern Passage closed after 2 survey ships discovered unstable reefs beneath it. Nathaniel had praised those achievements in private. In public, he had called them his own, and when the Admiralty offered him a position on the condition that he remove his interfering wife from harbour affairs, he had surrendered her authority without hesitation. The pain of that choice pressed harder than the iron door. Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering his hand on her arm in the courtyard. He had looked at her as though ambition could transform 6 years of loyalty into treason. A scraping sound came from the adjoining cell. Lady Blackmere? Mr. Fenwick's voice was weak. Eleanor crossed to the wall, separating them. A narrow ventilation gap ran between the stones. Are you badly hurt? My head is stubborn. It will survive. The old lighthouse keeper breathed unevenly, but they took my keys and smashed the signal lever before dragging me out. Who attacked you? I did not see his face. Someone entered through the service door after sunset. He knew where the spare oil was kept. Did he change the lens? No. The blue apparatus was already fitted behind the main frame. Eleanor pressed her fingers against the gap. Installing an additional lens would require tools, measurements, and uninterrupted access. It could not have been done during a hurried attack. How long was it there? At least several days, perhaps longer. The housing had been painted black, so it disappeared behind the shutters. That meant the operation had begun before Nathaniel transferred the lighthouse to Edmund. Before Eleanor was accused. Did you tell my husband? I tried, Lord Edmund interrupted, before I could explain. Fenwick coughed. Then he showed the Duke your ledger. What exactly did the forged instructions say? That the red lens must be displayed when the royal formation came within 12 miles. It also ordered me to leave the eastern shutter unlocked. Lecked. Eleanor frowned. The red light had drawn the fleet toward the reef, but a lighthouse keeper would never measure naval distance in ordinary miles. Admiralty signals used nautical miles and bearings. The forger had copied her handwriting without understanding her work. Fenwick, did the page contain my usual tide mark in the lower corner? No, Your Grace. Every signal instruction Eleanor wrote carried a tiny crescent beside the date rising or falling, depending on the tide. It was not decorative. It told the keeper how visibility and current would affect an approaching vessel. Nathaniel had seen hundreds of those marks. He had chosen not to notice their absence. A bell rang somewhere above them. Then came the clatter of boots. Thomas Reed descended alone, carrying a lantern and a folded blanket. His face appeared through the bars. "I brought this for you, Your Grace." Eleanor did not reach for it. "Why?" "The cells become cold before dawn. 3,000 sailors may never see the dawn." His fingers tightened around the blanket. "I cannot disobey the Duke. I am not asking you to release me. I am asking you to look through the western window upstairs. Tell me whether the harbour buoys are still burning." Thomas hesitated. "That is all?" "That is all." He left the blanket against the bars and climbed the stairs. Several minutes passed before he returned, breathing faster. "The first two are lit. The third and fourth are dark." Eleanor had expected it, yet the confirmation chilled her. The extinguished buoys marked the safe turn away from the widow's teeth. Without them, the fleet would follow the lighthouse directly into the eastern passage. "Listen carefully," she said. "My father taught me that every harbour must have two ways to guide a ship. If the lighthouse fails, the western beacon can show the safe channel. Lord Edmund placed men around it. Then we do not need the beacon." Thomas stared at her. "Open the confiscated goods register," Eleanor continued. 3 weeks ago, customs seized 6 barrels of whale oil from an unlicensed trader. They are stored on the western pier. How could barrels on a pier guide a fleet? With fire, 6 flames in a diagonal line would mean immediate deviation to the west. And if the officers see me, you will be arrested." His face paled. Eleanor softened her voice. "You are free to walk away, but if those ships strike the rocks, obedience will not make you innocent." For several seconds, only the sea echoed beneath the floor. Then Thomas drew the cell key from his belt. He did not unlock the door. Instead, he pushed the key beneath the bars. "I will prepare the oil," he said, "but I cannot cross the guarded pier alone." Eleanor picked it up. This was not rescue. It was a choice, and for the first time that night, someone had made the right one. She freed Fenwick first. When the old keeper emerged, Eleanor saw a strip of black paint embedded beneath his fingernail. He had torn it from the hidden lens housing during the attack. She rubbed it between her fingers. Beneath the black surface lay a thin layer of gold. Only one workshop in Blackmere gilded naval instruments before painting them. It belonged to Edmund Vale. Above them, a second bell began to ring. Fenwick looked toward the ceiling. "The fleet has crossed the 12-mile marker." Eleanor closed her hand around the fragment. "Then we have less than 90 minutes to steal my husband's harbour back." Eleanor climbed the customs house stairs with Fenwick behind her and Thomas several steps ahead. At the upper landing, Thomas extinguished his lantern. Through the narrow window, the harbour appeared divided between darkness and fire. The lighthouse burned blue above the eastern cliffs, while the first 2 navigation buoys flickered weakly below. Beyond them, the lanterns of the royal fleet had drawn closer. 30 ships were now sailing toward the widow's teeth. 2 officers stood outside the customs house entrance. Thomas looked back at Eleanor. "There is another way out," she whispered. "The seizure room opens onto the loading tunnel." He led them through a corridor stacked with confiscated crates. A heavy oak door blocked the tunnel, but Fenwick removed a steel pin from his coat lining. "I keep more than one spare key," he murmured. Despite everything, Eleanor nearly smiled. The door opened onto a stone passage beneath the quay. Waves struck the wall on the other side, sending tremors through the floor. Smugglers had used the tunnel decades earlier, before Eleanor converted it into a secure route for moving valuable cargo during storms. Nathaniel had called the renovation an unnecessary expense. Tonight, it allowed them to pass beneath Edmund's guards unseen. They emerged behind a row of warehouses on the western pier. 6 barrels marked with customs seals stood near the water, exactly where Eleanor remembered. Thomas reached for a crowbar. "Not yet," she said. "If we ignite them here, Edmund's men will extinguish them before the fleet understands the pattern." "Then where?" Eleanor pointed towards 6 stone mooring posts, extending along the outer pier. 1 barrel on each post, equal distance between them. We light the nearest first and the farthest last. Fenwick examined the rough water. The outer posts are exposed. A single wave could sweep a man away. Then no one goes alone. They rolled the first barrel from the storage rack. The work was slow and brutally loud. Every turn of the wooden rim seemed to echo across the harbour. Thomas kept watch, while Eleanor and Fenwick guided the barrel onto a low transport cart. They had moved only 2 barrels when a voice called from the shadows. "Stop where you are." A customs officer stepped between the warehouses with a pistol raised. Thomas froze. Eleanor recognized Lieutenant Samuel Pike, a man whose promotion she had once delayed after he accepted payment from smugglers. Edmund had restored him to duty that morning. "Lady Blackmere," Pike said, "Lord Edmund warned us you might escape. Did he also tell you why 4 navigation buoys were extinguished? He said you sabotaged them. I have been imprisoned since before the lights failed." Pike's pistol wavered for the smallest instant. Then he aimed it directly at her chest. "Return to the customs house." A cannon boomed from the fleet. 2 blasts followed. Fenwick whispered, "They are requesting the eastern depth." Eleanor kept her eyes on Pike. "If that signal is answered falsely, the leading ships will enter water too shallow for their keels. You served aboard the Valiant. You know what happens when a warship runs aground, under full sail." Pike's mouth hardened. "You ruined my career. I prevented you from selling the harbour to men who would have ruined it. You had no proof. I had your signature on 3 cargo releases." His finger tightened around the trigger. Behind him, a shadow moved. Thomas struck Pike's wrist with the crowbar. The pistol fired into the air, and Fenwick drove his shoulder into the officer's chest. Pike fell against a crate, but his shout carried across the pier. Lanterns flared near the Lighthouse road. "We have minutes now," Thomas said. Eleanor took Pike's pistol and removed the ammunition rather than keep the weapon. Then she looked toward the fishermen gathered behind the harbour gates. They had obeyed Nathaniel's order to remain on shore because their livelihoods depended upon the Duke's licenses. Asking them to defy him might cost them their boats and homes. Eleanor climbed onto a cargo crate. "Men of Blackmere," she called. Faces turned toward her. "The eastern buoys are dark. The royal fleet is being led onto the reefs." A guard shouted for her arrest, but she continued. "You know these waters. You know I could not extinguish those lights while locked beneath the customs house. I will not command you to help me. I will only tell you what your silence will cost." She pointed toward the approaching formation. "Those ships carry sons, husbands, and fathers. If the first vessel strikes, the rest will collide behind it. By sunrise, Blackmere Bay will be filled with wreckage, and every man standing here will know he watched it happen." For one breath, no one moved. Then, a broad-shouldered fisherman named Isaac Bell crossed the gate. Nathaniel had once ordered his boat seized for unpaid harbour fees. Eleanor had discovered that the debt resulted from a clerical mistake and restored it. Isaac took hold of the first barrel. "My eldest boy serves on the Resolute." Another fisherman stepped forward, then 5 more. Within minutes, men who had been afraid to challenge the Duke were rolling whale oil barrels toward the mooring posts. Women carried rope, canvas, and lanterns. Fenwick arranged them at precise intervals while Thomas poured narrow oil trails between the barrels. It was Eleanor's first victory of the night, but it belonged equally to the harbour she had protected. "Lady Blackmere," Nathaniel's voice cut through the commotion. He approached with 12 armed officers. Edmund walked at his side, the brass lighthouse key still hanging from his waist. Nathaniel's face changed when he saw the opened barrels. "You escaped royal custody and assaulted an officer. I am creating a deviation signal. You are setting fire to my pier. Your pier can be rebuilt. 3,000 drowned men cannot." Edmund stepped forward. "She intends to confuse the fleet further, arrest everyone assisting her." The officers moved toward the fishermen. Eleanor raised the fragment of painted metal she had taken from Fenwick's hand. This came from the hidden blue lens housing inside the lighthouse. "The gold beneath the paint matches the instruments produced in your workshop." Edmund did not look at the fragment. He looked at Fenwick. That single glance revealed more than a confession would have. Nathaniel noticed it, but again he hesitated. Eleanor held the fragment toward him. "Send 1 officer to Edmund's workshop. Examine the gilding vats. Compare the mixture." "Ah, Gao. There is no time for an amateur investigation," Edmund said. "The fleet must be redirected from the tower. Then show us the order you intend to send." Edmund's hand moved toward his coat. A folded signal sheet protruded from the pocket beside the copper wire. Eleanor stepped forward and seized its corner. The paper tore between them. Half remained in Edmund's hand. Half fell near Nathaniel's boots. The Duke picked it up. On the page was the order for the fleet to continue east, but the instruction had been written before Eleanor supposedly changed the lighthouse signal. A date was visible at the bottom. 3 days earlier. Nathaniel stared at his cousin. Edmund moved first. He drew a pistol from beneath his coat and fired into the nearest barrel. Flame erupted across the western pier. The barrel exploded in a sheet of orange flame. Burning oil rushed across the pier, racing through the channels between the stones. Fishermen scattered as canvas, rope, and the second barrel caught fire. A woman screamed when the hem of her dress ignited. Eleanor seized a wet sailcloth and threw it around her. "Roll on the stones." Isaac Bell pulled the woman clear, while Thomas kicked the remaining barrels away from the spreading flames. Fenwick dropped to his knees and smothered the nearest trail with sand. Nathaniel's officers closed around Edmund, but the Duke raised one hand. "No one moves until I understand what has happened." Eleanor stared at him through the smoke. "Your cousin fired into the oil." "To stop an unauthorized signal," Edmund replied. His pistol had already disappeared beneath his coat. A signal that would have scattered the royal formation and exposed its flank. Nathaniel looked down at the torn paper in his hand. "What is this order?" "A contingency prepared at the Admiralty's request. 3 days before my wife was accused?" "Because we already suspected her." The answer came too quickly. Nathaniel's gaze shifted toward Eleanor, and she saw the question in his face. For the first time that night, he wanted an explanation rather than a confession. Then a fresh cannon blast rolled over the bay. Fenwick climbed onto a mooring post to see beyond the smoke. "The leading division is turning east." Eleanor forced herself away from Edmund. Exposing him would mean nothing if the fleet reached the reefs first. "The oil signal is lost," Thomas said. "Not all of it." 2 unopened barrels had rolled to the far side of the pier. One had split at the rim, but the other remained intact. A single flame could not form the deviation pattern. Eleanor looked toward the harbour warehouses. Their upper windows faced the sea at different heights. 6 lights placed diagonally across them would reproduce the same signal. "Isaac, divide the remaining oil into lantern tins. Thomas, find every polished tray in the customs house. Fenwick, place 1 lamp in each warehouse window, beginning at the lowest western window and ending at the highest eastern one." Fenwick followed her gaze and understood. "A reflected deviation line. It will appear 6 times brighter from the water." Nathaniel caught her arm as she passed. "You will not take command of my harbour again." She pulled free, "Then give an order that saves it." He glanced toward Edmund. That hesitation was answer enough. Eleanor turned to the gathered workers. "Do exactly as Fenwick tells you." They moved without waiting for the Duke's permission. Lantern tins were filled. Polished serving trays, copper lids, and customs mirrors were carried from the buildings. Women climbed staircases with oil lamps, while fishermen positioned the reflectors. Edmund stepped beside Nathaniel. "She is creating panic to conceal her guilt. If you allow this, every witness will say she commanded your officers while you stood helpless." Nathaniel's face hardened. "Lady Blackmere, stop this immediately." No one obeyed him. The first lamp appeared in a warehouse window, then the second. By the time the 6th ignited, a diagonal line of reflected fire stretched above the western pier. Its light cut through the smoke and shone across the bay. The royal fleet answered with 1 long cannon blast. Fenwick gripped the railing. "They have seen us." Eleanor watched the leading ship. Its lanterns shifted slowly as its bow began turning west. A cheer rose from the harbour. 1 vessel followed, then another. The 1st Division moved away from the Widow's Teeth, and the 2nd adjusted behind it. 30 ships changed course in a great arc, their lanterns sweeping across the water. For a moment, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe. She had not cleared her name, recovered the lighthouse, or escaped Nathaniel's accusation. But the fleet was no longer sailing blindly toward destruction. Isaac Bell gripped her shoulder. "You saved my son." "We all did." A rider thundered onto the pier wearing an Admiralty dispatch coat. "The fleet has received the Duke of Blackmere's emergency deviation signal," he called. "The flagship requests confirmation that the western route is secure." Silence fell. Nathaniel looked at the line of lights Eleanor had devised. Edmund answered before anyone else could speak. "Tell the flagship." His Grace identified the sabotage and ordered the western signal lit. Eleanor turned sharply. The messenger saluted Nathaniel. The Admiralty will be informed of your decisive action, Your Grace. Nathaniel had only to correct him. His eyes met Eleanor's. He knew who had designed the signal. He knew whose authority the fisherman had followed. He had watched her save the fleet while he tried to stop her. Yet the appointment on his coat had been granted because the Admiralty believed he could control Blackmere Harbour. "Send the confirmation," he said. The messenger rode away, carrying the lie. Eleanor felt something within her become still. Nathaniel had not merely doubted her. He had taken the first victory she had won against the man framing her and claimed it for himself. He stepped closer. "I will correct the report when the emergency has passed." "No, you will correct it when doing so no longer costs you anything. This is not the moment for wounded pride." "My pride is not wounded. My trust is dead." His face tightened, but before he could answer, Fenwick shouted from the end of the pier. "The 3rd Division is not turning." 6 ships at the rear of the formation continued east. Their lanterns maintained a straight line toward the reefs. Eleanor studied their position. "They cannot see the warehouse signal," she said. "The headland is blocking it." "We can relight the western beacon," Thomas suggested. Edmund smiled faintly. Eleanor saw it and understood. The false lighthouse signal had never been intended to destroy the entire fleet. The 1st Divisions were meant to survive and witness the disaster. Only those final 6 ships had been positioned where the deviation light would be hidden. "Which vessels are in the 3rd Division?" she asked the Admiralty officer nearest her. He unfolded a formation list. Defiance, Monarch, St. George, Resolute, Crown's Mercy, and the King's Venture. Nathaniel went pale. The King's Venture carried the sealed naval payroll, confidential coastal defense plans, and Prince Frederick, the King's younger brother. This was not random destruction. Someone intended to kill a prince and seize whatever washed ashore. Eleanor looked toward Edmund. He was no longer standing beside the Duke. At the far end of the pier, a horse galloped toward the eastern cliffs. Edmund rode with the lighthouse key at his waist and the remaining half of the dated signal order inside his coat. Nathaniel shouted for his officers to follow. Eleanor caught his sleeve. "If you send armed men up the main road, Edmund will see their lanterns and destroy the evidence." "Then what do you suggest?" "Seal the harbour, search his workshop, send Fenwick through the keeper's path, and allow me to examine the signal mechanism." Ah. Nathaniel looked toward the lighthouse, then at the torn order still clenched in his hand. Here was his opportunity to verify everything before making another choice. Instead, he called to the captain of his guard. "Arrest Fenwick, Thomas Reed, and every fisherman who assisted my wife. Take the Duchess back to the customs house." Shock moved through the crowd. Nathaniel faced Eleanor. "You created an unauthorized fire, caused a riot, and interfered with a royal formation. Until the Admiralty determines who is guilty, I am placing the entire harbour under Lord Edmund's authority." Lord Edmund's. Behind him, the 6 isolated warships sailed closer to the hidden reefs. Eleanor no longer saw a husband deceived by a clever relative. She saw a man who had been offered the truth repeatedly and kept choosing the lie because it protected his power. The boundary inside her became absolute. "I will save those ships," she said, "but I am no longer saving this marriage." Nathaniel's expression changed, but only for an instant. "Take her." 2 officers seized Eleanor's arms. Around them, fishermen protested as guards moved through the crowd, binding the same people who had just saved most of the royal fleet. Isaac Bell was forced to his knees. "My son is aboard the Resolute," he shouted. "You cannot imprison us while his ship sails toward those rocks." "The harbour is under military authority," Nathaniel replied. "Any further resistance will be treated as treason." Eleanor looked at the silver Admiralty insignia on his coat. He had wanted that symbol so desperately that he could no longer distinguish authority from obedience to his own fear. Thomas and Fenwick were placed beside her. Thomas's face had gone pale, but the young guard held his head upright. "I released the Duchess," he announced. "The others knew nothing about it." Eleanor turned to him. He was trying to protect the harbour workers by taking responsibility alone. The captain of the guard struck Thomas across the mouth. Nathaniel did not intervene. A customs clerk hurried onto the pier carrying a sealed dispatch. "Your Grace, a message from the flagship." Nathaniel broke the seal. His eyes moved rapidly across the page. "What does it say?" Eleanor asked. He folded the message. The first 24 ships have entered the Western Channel safely. The rear division has not acknowledged the correction. Because the cliffs block the signal, let us reach the Western Beacon. The Admiralty has ordered me to secure the harbour and detain anyone connected with the sabotage. Did the order name me? Nathaniel said nothing. Eleanor understood. The Admiralty had not accused her. He had made that decision himself. Read the dispatch aloud. This is not a public proceeding. You declared my guilt before the entire harbour. Now you hide the words that might contradict you. The workers began murmuring. Nathaniel turned to the captain. Clear the pier. Before the guards could move, a lantern flashed from a watchpost above the town. 3 short signals. A pause. 2 more. Fenwick strained against his restraints. The rear division has reached the final turning mark. Eleanor calculated the distance. 40 minutes before the leading ship enters the reef field. Nathaniel looked toward the Lighthouse road, where Edmund had disappeared. If my cousin is responsible, he can still correct the signal from the tower. He will not, Eleanor said. Those 6 vessels are his target. You cannot know that. The King's Venture carries Prince Frederick. Edmund serves men who oppose the prince's naval reforms. Kill him in a wreck blamed on me, and they remove a royal obstacle while placing Blackmere Harbour under their control. Nathaniel stared at her. The theory was incomplete, but it gave meaning to every action. The forged ledger, the false wartime lens, the hidden explosives, and Edmund's insistence that Eleanor be arrested before the fleet arrived. She stepped closer despite the officers holding her. Search Edmund's workshop. You will find the same gilded metal as the lens housing. Examine his dispatch records. You will find correspondence sent before the fleet's route was publicly announced. Nathaniel unfolded the torn half of Edmund's signal order. Its date remained visible. 3 days earlier. You have enough to investigate, she said. Do not choose him again. The harbour waited for his answer. Nathaniel looked at the frightened workers, the bound lighthouse keeper, and the 6 warships moving toward destruction. Then he looked toward the customs clerk, who wore the Admiralty's colours. To admit uncertainty now would expose that he had accepted a royal appointment while ignoring evidence against the man he placed in command. It would reveal that Eleanor not he had saved the first 24 ships. Nathaniel folded the torn order and slipped it into his coat. Lady Blackmere is formally relieved of all authority over the harbour and its dependent properties, he announced. Her private correspondence, accounts, and signal records are to be seized for examination. Eleanor felt the practical meaning immediately. The Lighthouse cottage had been promised to her for life, but Nathaniel controlled it under their marriage settlement. Her harbour income paid the pensions of 12 widows and supported the families of injured sailors. By seizing her accounts, he had cut off everyone who depended upon her. He continued, "Until the royal inquiry concludes, she will be confined at Greyhaven House. Lord Edmund Vale will retain command of Blackmere Point." Even the guards appeared disturbed. "You are giving him access after he fired upon the pier and fled with evidence?" Eleanor asked. "He acted to prevent an unlawful signal. He tried to kill us. No one was killed. Is that the standard you require before believing me?" Nathaniel's silence settled between them. A distant explosion shook the eastern cliffs. Every lantern in the harbour trembled. The sound had not come from a cannon. It was deeper, muffled by stone and water. Fenwick closed his eyes. The lower beacon tunnel. Eleanor's stomach tightened. The tunnel ran from the lighthouse foundation to a maintenance platform above the eastern passage. During her father's time, it had stored emergency lamps and rescue lines. Now she understood the copper wire inside Edmund's coat. He had placed explosives there. The blast collapsed part of the cliff road. Rocks thundered into the sea, blocking the keeper's path and cutting the western beacon off from the harbour. Nathaniel shouted orders for men to clear the road. "It will take hours," Fenwick said. "Those ships have minutes." Eleanor looked toward the dark shape of the headland. There was one route Edmund might not know, a sea cave beneath the old chapel, accessible only at a falling tide. But the tide was rising. Anyone entering it would have one chance to reach the maintenance stairs before the passage flooded. She leaned toward Thomas. "When they take us through the seizure room, fall against the 3rd cargo shelf." He gave no sign that he had heard. The guards marched them toward the customs house. Behind Eleanor, Nathaniel ordered every gate closed and every fishing boat chained to the quay. That was Edmund's true objective. By transferring authority, seizing Eleanor's records, imprisoning the fishermen, and sealing the harbour. Nathaniel had removed every person and vessel capable of reaching the 6 ships. The scheme no longer depended upon deceiving him. It now operated through his direct commands. Inside the seizure room, Thomas stumbled exactly where Eleanor had instructed. His shoulder struck the 3rd shelf, knocking a crate of confiscated tools onto the floor. Guards cursed as metal hooks, hammers, and cutting blades scattered across the passage. Fenwick fell beside him, blocking the doorway. Eleanor dropped to one knee and seized a narrow rigging knife. She hid it inside her sleeve before an officer dragged her upright. Minutes later, all 3 were locked in separate cells. Nathaniel appeared on the other side of Eleanor's bars. "I will send a rescue party when the road is cleared. The ships will be wrecked before then. I have done everything the law permits." "No. You have done everything your ambition requires." He flinched. Eleanor drew the hidden knife and cut through the rope around her wrists. Nathaniel reached for the cell key, but she moved faster, pulling Thomas's spare key from inside her glove. She unlocked the inner gate and stepped between them. "You are confined by my order," he warned. Eleanor opened Fenwick's cell, "and those men are sailing toward death by yours." She freed Thomas next. Then she faced Nathaniel for what she knew might be the final time as his wife, in anything but name. "You took my lighthouse, my income, my reputation, and the truth I placed in your hands. You will not take my conscience as well." She closed the iron gate between them and turned the key, leaving the Duke of Blackmere inside the prison he had chosen for her. Then Eleanor, Fenwick, and Thomas ran toward the flooded passage beneath the old chapel. The chapel passage opened behind a crumbling stone altar at the edge of the harbour. Thomas pulled away a warped wooden panel, while Fenwick searched the floor for the iron release ring. Behind them, bells rang from the customs house. Nathaniel's guards had discovered their duke locked behind the inner gate. Fenwick found the ring and pulled. The altar shifted several inches, releasing a breath of wet, freezing air from the darkness below. "The cave may already be flooded," Thomas said. "It will be completely flooded in 30 minutes, Eleanor replied. "We need only 20. She took a lantern from the chapel wall and descended first. The steps were slick with salt. Water surged around her ankles before she reached the bottom, then rose to her knees as the passage narrowed beneath the cliff. Each wave extinguished the sound of the harbour behind them. Fenwick stopped at a rusted iron bracket fixed to the wall. "Your father placed guide ropes here. The ropes were replaced last autumn. They are gone." The cut ends floated in the water. Edmund knew about the cave. Eleanor lifted the lantern. Scratches marked the stone at shoulder height, and black residue coated the empty brackets. Someone had dragged barrels through the passage recently. Explosives had not merely been planted in the beacon tunnel. They had been transported through the cave, so no harbour guard would see them. A shot echoed from the chapel steps. "Lady Blackmere!" the captain of the guard shouted. "Return immediately, by order of the Duke." Thomas pushed a broken iron bar through the release mechanism. The stone altar slid back into place, sealing the entrance. "That will delay them," he said. "It may also seal us inside," Fenwick replied. They continued. The water reached Eleanor's waist. Without the guide ropes, they had to feel their way along the wall while the lantern flame weakened above the waves. A violent surge struck Thomas and swept him from his feet. Eleanor caught his coat. Fenwick seized her waist, bracing himself against the stone as the current pulled all 3 toward a submerged opening. For several desperate seconds, Eleanor could not breathe. The lantern fell from her hand and vanished. Darkness became absolute. Then the water receded. Thomas coughed against the wall. "I can still walk." Eleanor held his wrist until she was certain he meant it. From somewhere ahead came a metallic knocking. 3 beats. Pause. 3 more. Fenwick pressed his ear to the stone. The maintenance bell. "Someone is signalling from the outer platform." "Could it be Edmund?" Thomas asked. "No," Eleanor said. "He controls the tower. He would have no reason to ask for help." They moved toward the sound. At the end of the passage, Eleanor found a vertical iron ladder. She climbed through a hatch and emerged onto a narrow platform carved into the cliff above the eastern passage. Wind struck her with enough force to drive her back against the rock. Below, the sea boiled around the widow's teeth. The 6 royal warships were close enough for her to see sailors moving across their decks. The Defiance led the division. unaware that the darkness ahead concealed a reef less than half a mile away. A wounded naval signalman lay beside the maintenance bell. His coat was torn, and blood soaked one leg. Thomas climbed onto the platform. "How did you get here?" "The prince sent me ashore in a cutter when our division failed to see the western signal," the man gasped. "Men from the lighthouse fired on us. The cutter struck the rocks. I was the only one who reached the platform." Eleanor knelt beside him. "Can the ship see this position?" "The leading vessels can, but the emergency lamp is destroyed." The iron lamp frame hung above them, with its lens shattered. The oil reservoir had been pierced by a bullet. Eleanor examined the maintenance bell. It was too small to be heard over the wind, but its polished bronze surface caught the revolving blue light from the tower. An ordinary signal required flame. A reflected signal required only light and movement. She turned to Fenwick. "If we angle the bell toward the fleet, can we interrupt the blue beam?" His eyes widened, like a shutter. "Exactly." They tore the bell from its frame and lifted it toward the lighthouse. Each time the blue beam crossed the platform, Eleanor rotated the bronze surface, reflecting a sharp flash toward the ships. 2 short flashes. Too long. Too short. Danger beneath the water. Reverse immediately. The Defiance answered with a cannon, but it did not turn. "The current is carrying her forward," the wounded signalman said. "She needs a second warning before the captain risks reversing the entire formation." Eleanor raised the bell again. A rifle cracked from the lighthouse. The bullet struck the bronze, tearing it from her hands. It spun over the edge and disappeared into the sea. Edmund had seen them. A second bullet shattered stone beside Fenwick's head. They pressed themselves against the cliff. Above, the blue signal changed. 3 long flashes ordered the fleet to maintain full speed. The Defiance answered. Its sails remained filled. "We cannot stop them from here," Thomas said. Eleanor looked down at the remains of the signalman's cutter. A length of red sailcloth had caught between 2 rocks. Farther out, one of the extinguished navigation buoys rolled in the waves, its chain apparently severed. If they could reach it, they might relight the buoy and tow it across the ship's path. Then she saw dark shapes moving beneath the surface around the buoy. Barrels. Copper wire joined them in a line extending toward the lighthouse cliff. The explosives were not beneath the beacon tunnel. They were anchored across the eastern passage. Edmund intended to detonate them beside the King's Venture. The blast would kill Prince Frederick even if the ship avoided the reefs. "Fenwick, how is the wire triggered?" "From the tower's lower mechanism room." "Can it be cut from the water?" "If we find the main line." Thomas stared at the waves. "No one can swim through that current." The wounded signalman gripped Eleanor's sleeve. "There is a chain beneath the platform. Rescue crews use it to cross to the outer marker." Fenwick found the chain fixed below the lowest step. Much of it was submerged, but it ran toward the floating barrels. Eleanor removed her heavy outer dress, leaving only the lighter wool gown beneath. She tied the rigging knife to her wrist. Thomas caught her hand. "You may not reach the line before the ships arrive. Then keep signaling with anything that reflects light." She climbed down until the sea closed over her shoulders. The cold stole her breath. For the first time that night, fear broke through her determination. Eleanor imagined the sea closing above her before she could cut the wire, and Nathaniel telling the world that her death had proved her guilt. She did not fear dying as much as she feared dying unheard. Her hand began to shake. Then she saw the lanterns of the Resolute through the spray and remembered Isaac Bell's words. "My eldest boy serves aboard her." Eleanor tightened her grip on the chain. She could be afraid and still continue. Hand over hand, she followed the chain away from the cliff. Waves lifted her, slammed her against the rocks, and dragged at her skirts. Behind her, Fenwick used the signalman's metal dispatch case to reflect warnings toward the Defiance. Eleanor reached the first barrel. Copper wire passed around its iron ring and continued beneath the water. She followed it to a thicker cable, raised the knife, and began soaring through the protective covering. The Defiance loomed above her. Men shouted from its deck. The knife broke through the outer layer, exposing 2 insulated strands. She cut the first. Nothing happened. She pressed the blade against the second. A surge pulled her below the surface. Her shoulder struck the barrel. The knife slipped from her fingers but remained attached to her wrist. She caught it again and cut with both hands. The wire snapped. At that exact moment, the lighthouse flashed white. For one hopeful second, Eleanor believed the detonator had failed. Then 3 barrels farther along the line exploded. The sea rose in a wall of fire. The blast threw Eleanor beneath the water and hurled burning wreckage against the Defiance. Its forward mast cracked, and the great ship turned sideways across the passage. The Resolute struck its stern. Behind them, 4 warships collided, while cannon, spars, and sailors crashed into the burning sea. Eleanor surfaced among fragments of timber. The broken ships filled her vision. For one terrible moment, Eleanor believed she had failed. Men were screaming in the water. The Resolute had struck the Defiance, and flames spread across the passage she had promised to protect. "I was too late," she whispered. Then she heard sailors calling to one another from the wreckage. The ships were damaged, but still afloat. Her cut had weakened the blast and stopped the barrels nearest the King's Venture from exploding. The fleet had not reached the Widow's Teeth, but the passage was now blocked, and the King's Venture was trapped behind the wreckage, with Edmund's remaining explosives still surrounding it. From the maintenance platform, Fenwick shouted her name. Eleanor tried to answer. Before she could, a hand closed around her ankle beneath the water and dragged her down. Eleanor twisted beneath the water and drove the broken rigging knife downward. The blade struck cloth. The hand released her ankle. She kicked toward the surface, but a second grip caught the back of her gown. Through the firelit water, she saw a man, in a dark harbour coat, struggling beside her. A length of copper wire had wrapped around his wrist, binding them both to a sinking barrel. He had not attacked her. He was drowning. Eleanor cut through the wire and pulled him upward. They broke the surface together as burning oil drifted across the waves. The man coughed violently. "Do not let them find me," he gasped. A section of shattered mast struck the water nearby. Eleanor caught a floating plank with one hand and held the stranger against it with the other. "Who are you?" "Matthew Crane, mechanist at Vale Instruments. Edmund's workshop." Eleanor looked toward the maintenance platform. Thomas had climbed down the rescue chain, while Fenwick and the wounded signalman lowered a rope. "Help me bring him in," she shouted. Thomas entered the water and reached them moments before another wave drove burning wreckage against the cliff. Together, they guided Crane toward the platform. Once they were safely above the water, Eleanor examined him. A bleeding cut crossed his forehead, and the sleeve she had stabbed hung open near his elbow. Inside his coat was a leather tool roll stamped with Edmund Vale's crest. Fenwick recognized it immediately. He built the false lens. Crane tried to rise. "If Vale learns I survived, he will learn nothing from us," Eleanor said. "But those ships are still trapped, and more explosives remain in the water. Tell me how to disable them." Crane looked at the wounded signalman, then at the 6 ships colliding beyond the reef line. "I was told the barrels would destroy empty smuggling vessels. Vale said the Navy needed evidence of criminal activity to seize Blackmere Harbour. You saw the royal formation." "Not until tonight. I tried to cut the second firing line, but his men threw me from the cliff." Crane reached inside his coat and removed a small piece of blue glass. Its broken edge fitted perfectly against the splinter Eleanor had found inside her locked desk. "I cut both pieces from the same alignment guide," he said. "Vale used it to build the false lens and copy your authorization mark." Eleanor closed her fingers around the joined fragments. The glass now proved that the object planted in her desk and the mechanism inside the lighthouse had come from the same workshop. "Can Edmund still detonate the barrels?" she asked. "Yes. The firing line runs through the lower gallery. If he reaches the lever, he can ignite it manually." Fenwick looked upward. The gallery can be reached from the maintenance stairs. The iron stairs climbing the cliff had partly collapsed in the earlier explosion. Several sections remained, clinging to the rock face above the platform. Thomas tested the lowest rung. "I can climb it. You will be visible from the lighthouse," Eleanor warned. "So will anyone else." Eleanor looked at the trapped ships. Sailors were lowering boats to rescue men from the water. The King's Venture had stopped behind the damaged formation, but the current pushed it slowly toward the remaining barrels. A lantern flashed from its quarterdeck. The wounded signalman translated aloud. "Prince Frederick requests Harbour Command identification." Eleanor took the dispatch case and reflected a response. "Blackmere Command compromised." A new signal returned. "Identify yourself." She hesitated. Nathaniel held the ducal title and the admiralty appointment. Edmund possessed the lighthouse. Eleanor had been publicly stripped of authority and accused of treason. Yet neither man was protecting the fleet. She raised the case again. Eleanor Harcourt, former harbour commissioner. The reply came swiftly. Your orders. The question changed everything. Not because a prince had restored what her husband took, but because Eleanor realized she no longer needed Nathaniel's permission to act according to her own knowledge. She signaled, lower sails, launch boats west, do not approach, black barrels. The king's venture answered in acknowledgement. Thomas began climbing. Fenwick followed, carrying Crane's tool roll. Eleanor tied the brass pin beneath her gown and turned to the mechanic. You will remain with the signalman. Crane seized her wrist. There is something else. Vale kept copies of every order in a red dispatch box at his workshop. Payments, lens designs, names of men who transported the powder. Can those records prove he forged my instructions? I engraved the handwriting plates myself. Eleanor went still. Edmund had not copied her writing by hand. He had reproduced it mechanically, using engraved plates, a process capable of creating dozens of convincing orders. Where are the plates? In a hidden drawer beneath the workshop press. That was the evidence she needed, but Edmund would destroy it the moment he realized Crane had survived. Thomas, she called. He looked down from the broken stairs. Do not follow us to the gallery. Reach the top path and go directly to Vale Instruments. Take Isaac Bell if he is free. Secure the red box, the engraving plates, and the gilding records. Bring them to the old Coast Guard station. The Duke's officers will be searching the workshop. Then do not enter through the front. Thomas nodded and continued upward. Eleanor climbed after Fenwick. The ascent tore at her wet hands. Several rungs had twisted away from the cliff, forcing her to cross gaps with nothing beneath her but black water and burning wreckage. Halfway up, a rifle barrel appeared above them. Fenwick pressed himself against the rock. Eleanor reached for the small pistol she had taken from Pike earlier, only to remember she had removed its ammunition. The man holding the rifle wore Nathaniel's guard uniform. He lowered the weapon. Your Grace? It was Lieutenant Pike. A bruise darkened his temple where Thomas had struck him, but he no longer looked hostile. Lord Edmund ordered us to shoot anyone approaching the tower, he said. Then we found 2 of his men, laying a new powder line across the cliff path. Where are they? One is dead. The other fled into the tower. Why should I trust you? Pike removed the ammunition from his rifle and handed both weapon and cartridges to Fenwick. Because you were right about the ships, and because the Duke ordered me to arrest Edmund 10 minutes ago. Eleanor studied him. Nathaniel changed his mind. He read the full Admiralty dispatch after you escaped. It stated that no accusation had been made against you. Lord Edmund had invented the order. That truth had finally cost Nathaniel more than doubt. By repeating a non-existent Admiralty accusation, he had publicly misused royal authority. Where is my husband? On his way to Vale's workshop with half the guard. Eleanor's hope vanished. Edmund wants him there. Pike frowned. The workshop records will implicate Lord Edmund, and the workshop contains enough powder to destroy an entire street. Nathaniel has been drawn away from the harbour, while Edmund remains in the lighthouse with the firing mechanism. She turned to Thomas, who had reached the top of the cliff. Do not go to the workshop, she called. Warn everyone away from it. A dull orange glow appeared above the rooftops. Then Vale Instruments erupted. The blast tore through the eastern quarter, sending glass, timber, and burning paper high over Blackmere. The force shook the cliff and knocked Thomas to his knees. The red dispatch box, the engraved plates, and the workshop records disappeared inside the flames. Eleanor closed her hand around the brass pin beneath her gown. Their strongest documentary proof had been destroyed. But Edmund had made one mistake. He believed Matthew Crane had died in the sea, and he did not know the mechanic had given Eleanor the one object without which his detonator could not function. From inside the lighthouse came the scrape of metal. The lower gallery doors opened. Edmund stepped onto the platform, holding Nathaniel at gunpoint. Blood ran down the Duke's face. His Admiralty insignia had been torn from his coat. Edmund pressed the pistol against his cousin's neck. Give me the coded pin, Eleanor, he called, or Blackmere will lose its Duke before it loses its prince. Eleanor climbed the final rung and stepped onto the cliff path. Fenwick and Pike emerged behind her, but Edmund tightened his arm around Nathaniel's throat. One more step, and your Duke dies. Nathaniel's hands were bound behind him. Blood from a wound above his brow ran into one eye, yet the greater injury showed in his expression. His cousin had used his ambition, accepted his protection, and rewarded him with a pistol against his neck. Eleanor felt no satisfaction, only urgency. Below them, the current carried the king's venture closer to the remaining powder barrels. "You need both coded pins to fire the main line," Eleanor said. Edmund smiled. "And you are carrying the second." He had guessed correctly. Eleanor kept her hands away from the cylinder, hidden beneath her gown. "If you kill Nathaniel, you lose your protection. He has already served his purpose. He removed you, imprisoned the lighthouse keeper, sealed the harbour, and placed every signal under my command. When the inquiry begins, his signatures will prove that he directed the entire operation." Nathaniel went still. "You told me the Admiralty had authorized the arrests. I told you what your vanity required you to believe." The words struck him more deeply than the pistol. Edmund forced him toward the gallery entrance. Inside, the hidden blue lens mechanism rotated above a network of copper wires and brass gears. A second firing lever had been installed beside the signal controls. Eleanor recognized the housing immediately. Its edges bore the same black paint and gold underlayer as the fragment Fenwick had preserved. Pike raised the unloaded rifle as if it still contained a cartridge. Edmund aimed at him. "Drop it." Pike obeyed. "You cannot leave Blackmere," Eleanor said. 24 royal ships are waiting in the Western Channel. The town has seen what you did. The town saw you ignite the pier and interfere with the king's fleet. By sunrise, it will also hear that you conspired with a disgruntled mechanic to murder Prince Frederick. He nodded toward the tower stairs. 2 armed men dragged Matthew Crane from the upper landing. Eleanor's breath caught. Crane's face was bruised. One of Edmund's men held the brass cylinder's matching pin against his throat. "They found him when he tried to leave the maintenance platform," Edmund said. "He has agreed to testify that you ordered the lenses, the engraving plates, and the explosives." "That is a lie," Crane gasped. A guard struck him in the ribs. Edmund looked at Eleanor. "He will repeat it more convincingly before the Admiralty." Their surviving witness had been captured. The workshop records were burning. Nathaniel still possessed the torn, dated order, but Edmund's men had searched him. Edmund drew the paper from his own coat and held it over an oil lamp. The flame consumed it. "Now," he said, "the pin." Eleanor stared at the ash falling across the gallery floor. Every obvious path to proving the scheme had been destroyed. Nathaniel turned his head toward her. "Do not give it to him." Edmund pressed the pistol harder against his neck. "You are hardly in a position to advise your wife." "No," Nathaniel said. "I surrendered that right tonight." His voice carried through the open gallery to the guards, sailors, and harbour workers gathering below. He looked past the weapon toward the cliff path. "Captain, record what I am about to say. I, the captain of the guard, stepped from the shadows with several officers. They could not fire without risking the Duke's life, but they were close enough to hear him clearly." Nathaniel continued. "Lady Blackmere did not order the false signal. The Admiralty never accused her. I concealed that fact after receiving its dispatch, because admitting it would have endangered my appointment." Edmund's expression hardened. Silence. "I claimed her reflected warning as my command, though she devised it, and I ordered her to stop. I transferred the Lighthouse to Lord Edmund after receiving evidence that implicated him. Every arrest made tonight was authorized by me." Murmurs rose from below. Nathaniel was not confessing to Edmund's crimes. He was naming his own. "If royal sailors died because the harbour was sealed," he said, "the responsibility begins with my orders. I surrender my Admiralty appointment and request that the Crown investigate my conduct." With those words, the future he had sacrificed Eleanor to obtain disappeared. Edmund struck him across the head with the pistol. Nathaniel fell to one knee. His confession could not restore Eleanor's trust, but it changed the balance around them. The guards below no longer regarded her as their Duke's disgraced wife. They saw the woman he had falsely accused and the only harbour commander still protecting the fleet. Edmund dragged Nathaniel toward the signal mechanism. "Give me the pin, or I will fire the manual line and kill them both." "The manual line cannot reach the barrels without Crane's connector," Eleanor said. Edmund glanced toward the mechanic. Only briefly, but Crane's reaction revealed fear. Eleanor understood that she had been wrong. The brass cylinder was not merely a key. It was the connector required to complete the circuit. Edmund needed her to insert it because doing so would place her fingerprints and her apparent cooperation on the detonator. He intended to kill Prince Frederick and leave Eleanor standing beside the firing mechanism. Eleanor drew the joined pieces of blue glass from beneath her gown. "This is what you need destroyed, is it not?" she asked. Edmund's eyes moved toward the glass. That involuntary glance was the confirmation she wanted. She hurled the pieces through the open gallery window. They vanished into the dark water below. Edmund fired. Nathaniel threw himself sideways. The bullet tore through his shoulder instead of his throat. Pike and Fenwick rushed into the gallery. Edmund's men seized Crane and retreated up the stairs, while Edmund kicked Nathaniel toward the firing mechanism. Then he pulled the manual lever. A spark raced down the copper line toward the barrels. Below the tower, one black barrel ignited. Flame raced along the line toward the King's Venture. "Cut the gallery cable," Fenwick shouted. Eleanor seized the rigging knife, but Edmund blocked her path. They struggled beside the rotating lens until he caught her wrist and drove her against the mechanism. Nathaniel, bleeding on the floor, reached for the fallen rifle. "It is unloaded," Pike warned. Nathaniel used it as a club. He struck Edmund behind the knees. Edmund fell, pulling Eleanor down with him. She tore free and sliced through the cable. The spark vanished halfway across the water. The King's Venture was safe, but Edmund had already escaped through the upper stairwell, with Crane as his hostage. The tower bell began ringing across Blackmere. From below came the sound of hooves, and another Admiralty messenger calling for the Duke's arrest. Eleanor looked at the signal mechanism. Its main plate contained a row of tiny engraved grooves, identical in shape to the brass cylinder. Above them, someone had scratched 3 words into the metal. E.H. Authorized modification. Her initials. Edmund had built the entire machine to appear as her work. Then Eleanor noticed the order of the grooves. One was reversed. A competent mechanist would never make that error. Yet, she had seen the same reversed pattern somewhere before, on the blue glass splinter planted inside her desk. The splinter was not merely part of a signal lens. It had broken from the engraving guide used to forge her authorization mark. If Edmund still possessed that guide, she could force him to reveal knowledge that only the forger could have. Eleanor rose and looked toward the royal ships. "Send a signal to Prince Frederick," she ordered. "Tell him Blackmere Harbour is secure and request that he convene a royal inquiry here at noon." Fenwick stared at the burning workshop. "Our records are gone. Edmund has taken the witness. I do not need him to confess." She picked up the engraved mechanism plate. "I need him to correct me." By noon, the smoke above Blackmere had thinned to a grey veil. The royal inquiry convened inside the harbour exchange, the only building large enough to hold naval officers, local magistrates, lighthouse workers, and the families of the injured sailors. Prince Frederick sat beneath the royal standard with his wounded arm in a sling. He had refused to return to the King's Venture until every surviving sailor had been recovered from the water. Nathaniel stood under guard to the prince's right. A physician had removed the bullet from his shoulder, but his coat remained torn and blood-stained. The silver Admiralty insignia was gone. He no longer occupied the Duke's ceremonial chair. Eleanor did. She had not asked for that distinction. Prince Frederick had ordered it after reading the fleet's signal record. On the table before her lay the surviving objects: the blue glass splinter, the gold-coated fragment from the hidden lens housing, the damaged brass cylinder, and the engraved plate removed from the lighthouse mechanism. They were not yet enough. Edmund could claim that Eleanor had commissioned all of them. Matthew Crane had vanished with him after escaping through the tower's upper stairwell. The burned workshop had yielded no red dispatch box, no engraving plates, and no intact payment records. The harbour doors opened. Edmund entered between 2 solicitors, dressed in an immaculate black coat. He had surrendered voluntarily an hour earlier. That decision worried Eleanor more than flight would have. "Lord Edmund Vale appears in answer to a royal summons," one solicitor announced. "He denies every accusation made by the Duchess of Blackmere." Edmund bowed to Prince Frederick. "I came as soon as I learned that my cousin's wife was attempting to place responsibility for her treason upon me." Nathaniel's hands clenched. Eleanor did not look at him. Prince Frederick gestured toward Edmund. "You may present your account." Edmund faced the room. Lady Blackmere resented losing control of the harbour. She ordered a special blue signal apparatus from my workshop, then used it to direct the fleet into danger. When her plan began to fail, She destroyed my premises and murdered the one craftsman who could testify against her. Whispers spread through the gallery. Edmund placed a folded document on the table. This is her original commission. The paper bore Eleanor's signature. Below it was a detailed order for blue glass, gilded mechanisms, engraved handwriting plates, and 3 electrical firing assemblies. Even Eleanor felt the force of it. The language imitated her precise style. The tied crescent appeared beside the date. A custom seal had been pressed into the lower corner. Edmund had corrected every weakness in the first forged ledger. Prince Frederick examined the paper. Duchess? It is false. Can you prove that? Yes, but not by examining the signature. Eleanor turned toward Fenwick, who installed modifications in the lighthouse. No lawful modification could be made without my presence, he answered. I saw none of this equipment until last night. Edmund smiled. An elderly keeper protecting the woman who employed him. Eleanor called Isaac Bell next. He described the extinguished buoys and the reflected deviation signal. Edmund dismissed him as a fisherman indebted to her. Lieutenant Pike testified that he had found Edmund's men laying powder along the cliff path. Edmund's solicitor produced Pike's prior disciplinary record and accused him of seeking revenge. One by one, Edmund attacked their credibility. Then Nathaniel stepped forward. I transferred the lighthouse to him. I saw the dated signal order in his possession before it burned. Edmund looked almost amused. You also imprisoned your own wife, falsely invoked the Admiralty, and admitted concealing a royal dispatch. Are we to believe your memory now, that you hope to regain her favour? Nathaniel absorbed the humiliation without answering. He had authenticated his choices, exactly as Eleanor required, but his word could not deliver her decisive proof. Edmund turned back to Prince Frederick. The Duchess offers loyal servants, indebted fishermen, a corrupt officer, and a husband desperate for forgiveness. I offer her written order. The room shifted toward him. That was what Eleanor had been waiting for. Eleanor lifted the blue glass fragments. You claim I ordered this signal apparatus? I do, Edmund answered. And your workshop merely followed my design? Exactly. Eleanor fitted the 2 fragments together. The broken edges matched perfectly. One piece was planted inside my locked desk. Matthew Crane recovered the other from the mechanism built in your workshop. Edmund's solicitor rose. A craftsman loyal to the Duchess could have altered both pieces. Then perhaps we should hear from the man who made them. The doors opened. Thomas Reed entered with Matthew Crane beside him. The mechanic's face was bruised, but he was alive. Under naval guard, he placed a red dispatch case on the table. I cut both pieces from the same sheet of glass, Crane said. Lord Edmund ordered me to build the false lens and engrave Lady Blackmere's authorization upon it. Edmund backed toward the doors. Eleanor opened the red case. Inside were payments to the men who extinguished the buoys, purchased the powder, attacked Fenwick, and intercepted the Royal Fleet's formation list. Beneath those records lay 2 coded letters, sealed with the winged anchor of an Admiralty commissioner. Thomas Reed stepped from behind the royal screen, alive and carrying the workshop's engraving plates. I removed them through the rear passage before the explosion, he said. Lady Blackmere ordered me to let Lord Edmund believe they had burned. Edmund backed toward the doors. The plates reproduced Eleanor's handwriting. The dispatch case contained payments to the men who extinguished the buoys, purchased the powder, and intercepted the royal formation list. But one question remained. Where was Matthew Crane? Eleanor opened the final ledger and read the most recent payment aloud. £50 to the keeper of St. Orison's warehouse for custody of the mechanist until the King's Venture is destroyed. Edmund lunged for the evidence. Naval guards forced him to the floor. From outside came the pounding of hooves. A rescue party had already been sent to St. Orison's. Prince Frederick examined the final page of the ledger. His face darkened. This payment was authorized with a seal belonging to a member of the Royal Council. The room fell silent. Edmund was not the architect of the conspiracy. He was its harbour agent. Eleanor placed the blue glass splinter beside the seal impression. Then the man who tried to kill you, she said, is already inside this building. Every door in the harbour exchange closed at once. Naval guards moved along the walls, while Prince Frederick studied the seal, impressed beside Edmund's final payment. Around him, members of the inquiry avoided one another's eyes. One man did not. Sir Rowland Ashcombe, The senior Admiralty Commissioner, who had recommended Nathaniel for office, remained seated near the royal standard. His gloved hand rested upon a silver cane bearing the same winged anchor emblem pressed into Edmund's ledger. Eleanor had seen that emblem before. It was stamped into the blue wax beneath Edmund's thumbnail on the night Nathaniel surrendered the Lighthouse. "Sir Roland," Prince Frederick said, "place your seal on the table." Ashcombe rose slowly. "My Royal Highness, you cannot possibly accept the accusations of a woman who was imprisoned for treason less than 12 hours ago." "She was imprisoned by her husband," the prince replied, "not by the crown." Ashcombe looked toward Nathaniel. That single glance exposed the final link. Nathaniel had been offered an admiralty appointment because Ashcombe needed a duke vain enough to remove the only person capable of recognizing the false signals. Edmund had manufactured the evidence, but Ashcombe had supplied the fleet's confidential formation and arranged for 6 specific ships to occupy the rear division. Eleanor opened the red dispatch ledger. 3 months ago, Prince Frederick proposed an audit of private naval suppliers. Vale Instruments would have lost its contracts, so Roland's companies would have lost far more. Ashcombe's face remained composed. "Commercial disagreement is not murder." "No, but this is." She placed 2 letters beside the ledger. Thomas had found them sewn inside the red dispatch case. Both were written in code, but the tide marks beside the dates were not Eleanor's. They identified the stages of the conspiracy. "Remove the keeper. Extinguish 4 buoys. Isolate the king's venture. Recover the royal defence plans after the wreck." Prince Frederick read the letters before passing them to the naval judge. "You intended to kill me and sell the coastal plans." Ashcombe struck the floor with his cane. A concealed blade sprang from its shaft. He seized the customs clerk beside him and dragged the young man against his chest. "Open the western door." The guards hesitated. Eleanor did not. "The door leads to the quay," she said. "There are 50 sailors outside who survived your barrels. Go through it if you wish." Ashcombe's eyes shifted toward the windows. That moment was enough. The clerk drove his heel down upon Ashcombe's foot. Nathaniel knocked the blade aside with his uninjured arm, and 2 naval guards forced the commissioner to the floor. No confession was needed. The blue glass, the records inside the red case, and the surviving witnesses had already spoken. Before sunset, Matthew Crane was rescued from St. Orison's warehouse. He identified Edmund as the man who ordered the false lens, the handwriting plates, and the firing mechanism. He also confirmed that Ashcombe had delivered the confidential fleet formation in person. The blue glass, the red dispatch case, and Crane's testimony. Ashcombe wanted Prince Frederick dead before the royal audit could expose years of fraudulent naval contracts. Edmund wanted the Blackmere Lighthouse, Vale Instruments contracts, and a permanent position controlling the harbour. They forged Eleanor's orders because her expertise made her the only believable scapegoat and the only person capable of discovering how the signals had been altered. Nathaniel's betrayal gave them everything they needed. By removing his wife without an inquiry, he gave Edmund the lighthouse key. By imprisoning Fenwick, he silenced the lawful keeper. By seizing Eleanor's records, he allowed forged instructions to replace genuine ones. By sealing the harbour, he prevented fishing boats from warning the final 6 ships. Ashcombe and Edmund had designed the conspiracy. Nathaniel had made it possible. Prince Frederick ordered both men held for trial on charges of treason, attempted murder, destruction of royal vessels, kidnapping, and conspiracy against the crown. Ashcombe's companies and Edmund's workshop were seized, pending restitution to the injured sailors and the families of those who had died during the collision. The accomplices who laid the powder and attacked Fenwick were arrested. Those who cooperated and helped locate the remaining explosives received reduced sentences, but none escaped accountability. Then Prince Frederick turned toward Nathaniel. "You concealed a royal dispatch, invoked admiralty authority you did not possess, detained innocent subjects, and knowingly left a compromised man in command." Nathaniel stood without defending himself. "Yes, Your Royal Highness. You will resign your appointment. Your authority over Blackmere Harbour is suspended, and the Crown will examine whether your remaining coastal privileges should be revoked." Nathaniel bowed his head. "I accept the judgment. That is not the only correction required." Nathaniel faced the crowded exchange. His voice was unsteady, but clear. "My wife warned me that the evidence against her was forged. I refused to examine it because the truth threatened my advancement. She saved the royal fleet while I obstructed her, and I claimed her achievement as my own. He looked at Isaac, Fenwick, Thomas, and the other harbour workers. I ordered your arrests to protect my pride. The responsibility was mine. Finally, he faced Eleanor. I took your authority, income, reputation, and safety. I believed that my title gave me the right to decide when your knowledge mattered. Nothing done to me today equals what I chose to do to you. He removed the brass lighthouse key from the evidence table and placed it before her. I ask for nothing. That was the first honest gift he had offered her all night. Not the key. The absence of a demand for forgiveness. Prince Frederick restored Eleanor's harbour commission by royal warrant. The lighthouse cottage and its income were placed in an independent trust beyond Nathaniel's control. Compensation seized from Vale Instruments funded the injured sailors, while Nathaniel voluntarily transferred a portion of his private, unentailed property to restore every pension interrupted by his orders. He also signed a formal deed granting Eleanor her own residence, household, income, and complete authority over whether their separation would become permanent. Weeks later, when the final repairs were completed, Eleanor climbed the lighthouse stairs with Fenwick and Thomas. A new clear lens stood inside the lantern chamber. Below, the repaired fleet waited in the western channel. Nathaniel stood alone on the quay. Since the inquiry, he had written to her only once. He did not ask her to return or forgive him. He listed every pension restored, every false accusation withdrawn, and every harbour family compensated from his private estate. His final line contained no promise that he had changed. It contained a question. If years of honest action ever give me the right to write again, you may tell me so. Until then, I will leave the choice entirely in your hands. Eleanor folded the letter and placed it inside the lighthouse ledger. She was not ready to answer, but she did not destroy it. As darkness settled over Blackmere, Fenwick offered her the brass key. She unlocked the signal room herself. On the night of her humiliation, Nathaniel had declared that by dawn she would either confess or watch 30 royal ships break beneath the cliffs. Now those ships sailed safely past Blackmere Point, while the lighthouse answered to her hand alone. Eleanor raised the lever. The true white flame swept across the sea. Then she opened the western passage and let the fleet go free.